The minute that Jane Roe emerged from anonymity in 1984 and revealed herself to be Norma McCorvey, the symbol developed complications. She was, it turned out, a drug addict and dealer, an alcoholic. She had dabbled in the occult. She is a lesbian.
I'm a former lesbian, former pro-abort, former Jane Roe. I'm a former lot. Seems like the older I get, the more former I come with everything. You know, which is cool with me because you never can get anywhere unless you've been somewhere. I've cheated people out of money. I've sold drugs. I was an abusive alcoholic for many, many years. I've done a lot against his teachings. But I think the far greater sin that I did was to be the plaintiff in Roe versus Wade. I'm Norma McCorvey, the former Jane Roe of the Roe versus Wade decision that brought legal child killing to America. I was persuaded by feminist attorneys to lie, to say that I'd been raped and I needed an abortion. It was all a lie. Since then, over 50 million babies have been murdered. I will take this burden to my grave.
Norma Leah McCorvey, born September 22nd, 1947. She left this life on February 18th, 2017. Norma was the Jane Roe of Roe versus Wade. In all of American history, it's arguable that the most controversial, divisive, and pernicious Supreme Court decision to have been handed down was Roe versus Wade, and its companion case, Doe versus Bolton, issued simultaneously on January 22, 1973. These two cases struck down the abortion laws of all 50 states. Roe versus Wade declared that abortion was a fundamental right and that an unborn child had no legal right to the protection of law. Doe versus Bolton defined a woman's health not just as her physical health, but a host of other definitions, such as her emotional and psychological well-being and the condition of her family, and by extension, her financial well-being. Roe and Doe effectively gave women and abortionists the cover that they needed to abort children through all 9 months of pregnancy without fear of criminal charges. This film deals with Norma McCorvey, or Miss Norma, as many of us called her. I met Norma McCorvey for the second time in 1995, right after her conversion. Over the years, we became close friends, participating in multiple pro-life events together over nearly 2 decades, traveling to multiple cities, talking on the phone, emailing, texting. She even stayed with my family in our home for an entire month during a rough stretch in her life. We're going to share with you some of our memories of Norma's conversion to Christ, as well as her efforts and her legacy to end the killing of children by abortion in America. We believe what Norma believed. We fought with her in the battles she fought. With few exceptions, the secular press never understood her. Worse yet, they did what they often do. They lied or they shaded the truth. For example, a journalist named Joshua Prager did an article on Norma in 2013 for Vanity Fair, in which he framed Norma as a phony, an ideological orphan, a woman doing what she did for money. That same journalist did another article in January of 2017, just before Norma died. And the headline stated that the real heroine of Roe versus Wade, the secret heroine, was Linda Coffey, the lesbian, pro-abortion attorney who had lunch with Norma in 1969 and got Norma to agree to be the Jane Roe of Roe versus Wade. The article clearly celebrated Roe versus Wade, a decision which has led to the murder of millions of babies. Sadly, this journalist is working on a book regarding Norma's life. If he writes about her as he did in the past, I'm afraid that this book will be a biased, stilted, pro-abortion piece on Norma. It's hard for me to believe that he will portray her much differently than he did in his previous articles, casting aspersions and doubts on Norma's conversion and her convictions. We want you to see Norma for the woman that we know she was, and to protect her story from out of balance or false narratives, stories that emphasize darkness and sin and ignore the light of Christ and His church, where she made her home in this life and the next. Even if Norma was a prodigal more than once, she always came home. Norma's early life was chronicled by her in her first book, I Am Roe. I Am Roe is a heartbreaking record of a childhood marred by abuse, followed by years of self-destructive choices. She said of herself, I am a rough woman, born into pain and anger and raised mostly by myself. I went to reform school, not high school or college. I have a bad temper, and oftentimes I lose it. I am my own worst enemy. Norma was born Norma Leah Nelson to Olin and Mary Nelson in Simmsport, Louisiana. Her father's mother was a prostitute who ultimately owned and operated a house of ill repute, which Norma visited to see her grandma. Norma's mother was physically beautiful, but cruel and extremely loose in her morals. Norma wrote sadly about her mother constantly cheating on her father, and her father struggling with his TV repair business to provide for an unfaithful wife and a family that was disintegrating. When Norma was 10, her parents moved to Texas, where they separated and divorced when she was 13 years old. Her mother was verbally and physically abusive. She beat Norma ruthlessly for small childhood infractions. She locked her in a closet for hours. She verbally degraded her mercilessly, calling her vicious names. So Norma decided she needed to run away. She stole money from the till of a service station and with her 10-year-old friend ran away to Oklahoma. When they were apprehended by police and returned to Texas, a judge sentenced her to 1 year in a Catholic boarding school for girls. Norma testified that she was sexually molested by an adult female while she was there. During one of her many conflicts with authorities in the school, she exploded in rage at one of the nuns, who then sent her back to the sentencing judge. She was 11 years old. He sent Norma to a state reform school for girls in Gainesville, Texas, where she spent most of her time until she was 15 years old. Before her conversion, Norma wrote that those years in reform school were the best years of her life. Life was stable. She wasn't being beaten by her mother. She had friends. She had teachers that cared about her. She returned home for good at the age of 15, and the cycle of conflict with her mother started again. This time, her mother sent her to live with a distant male relative in Louisiana. In the 3 weeks that Norma was there, she tells of being raped by him every night until her mother came to visit and saw the horrific shape Norma was in. Norma told her mother everything. Her mother cussed out the man The relative denied everything and called Norma and her mother whores. Sadly, her mother never pressed charges. She just took Norma home. Norma then started working as a roller skating waitress at an outdoor hamburger joint. It was while working there that she met her future husband, Woody McCorvey. Just after Norma turned 16, they were married. She said that her marriage to Woody McCorvey was one of the worst decisions of her life. They moved to California. A few months later, when they found out she was pregnant, he beat her viciously, accusing her of being unfaithful, which she was not. Norma filed a complaint with the police and fled back to Texas, again moving in with her mother. She saw Woody McCorvey 2 more times, once at her mother's house while she was pregnant, and once more in the hospital after her baby girl was born. And she never laid eyes on him again. During her pregnancy, she started frequenting a lesbian bar for friendship and acceptance, and slowly became part of that social circle. When her baby girl was born, Norma hoped that she would become a good mother and raise her daughter with some level of normalcy. She never got the chance. Her mother, who was violently opposed to Norma's lifestyle, literally stole Norma's baby. She hid her from Norma and told the police that Norma was an unfit mother. Soon after, when Norma was back in her mother's house, tired and hungover, her mother tricked her into signing documents that legally granted custody of her daughter to her mother. We know that in court, such surrender would never have stood the test of law, but Norma was so beaten down as a 17-year-old girl and so ashamed and depressed of certain of her choices that she never fought her mother. She accepted the decision and moved out. Norma saw her daughter on and off over the years at her mother's whims. Those visits would often end with abusive accusations from her mother and confusing tears of agony from Norma and her daughter. Norma's bitterness toward her mother stayed with her until the writing of her first book. The next 4 years of Norma's life were a blurred kaleidoscope of drug abuse, alcohol abuse, odd jobs, carnival barking, drug dealing, and promiscuity with women and men. It was a tragic story of self-will run wild, resulting in 2 more babies being conceived. The first baby she immediately placed for adoption. The second baby, the Roe baby, she sought to abort.
A couple of years later, got pregnant again. Didn't want to have it. Didn't want it in my body. I wanted to kill it. I wanted to have an abortion. I went to an illegal abortion clinic in Dallas. I had $250 of my rent money saved up. There was nobody there. Well, I went to this attorney, and he treated me pretty much like a word I can't say anymore. He said that he just knew of these 2 young law students who just graduated college, Sarah Weddington, Linda Coffey, and that they were trying to challenge the Texas statute on abortion. I mean, it just went right over my head. I mean, I didn't have a clue to what he was saying. And would I like to meet these 2 women? Sure.
We'll hear arguments number 18, Roe against Wade.
After the Roe versus Wade decision, Norma lived in relative anonymity with her lesbian partner in Texas. Together, they ran a small cleaning company and lived week to week financially, until Norma came out as the Jane Roe of Roe versus Wade. In 1989, NBC released a made-for-TV movie based roughly on Norma's life. The Norma character was played by Holly Hunter. That movie And the press surrounding Norma's coming out propelled Norma into the public eye, where she remained for the rest of her life.
My name is Norma McCorvey, aka Jane Roe. We must link arm in arm to protect and uphold the right to safe and legal abortion.
You were raped while you were in Georgia?
No, I wasn't.
As those years unfolded in Norma's life, I was founding and leading Operation Rescue, the largest peaceful civil disobedience movement in America's history. I was a guest on Oprah and Donahue and untold numbers of television programs. At that time, my name and the name of Operation Rescue were synonymous with pro-life activism and in-your-face controversy. On a personal note, to show how deeply antagonistic Norma's and my relationship was, the only pro-life group that she mentioned in I Am Roe was Operation Rescue, which I founded and led. The only pro-life leader she mentioned by name was me. The first time Norma and I came face to face was at a major pro-life protest we held in California. We were outside. Norma got as close to me as she could in the street and proceeded to blow a whistle in my ear with all her might, intermittently taunting and haranguing me. I in turn told her that she had blood on her hands, that millions of babies were dead because of her, that she would face the judgment of God, and that she should repent of what she had done and turn to Christ for forgiveness. And that is ultimately what she did. The path to her conversion was filled with miracles. It's a story so incredible that one is tempted to believe that it was written by and orchestrated by God Himself.
When I first met Miss Norma, when she really knew who I was in 1994, when she'd come out with the book I Am Roe, which is a terrible book. It's a foul, filthy, awful book. But that's what she wrote. Those were her words, and that's what she was, just tremendously tormented. And you could see it through the words of the book. It'd make you feel bad. She had a book signing down in Dallas, Texas, and I came there. Now, there were police all over one side of the road. They weren't going to let me in. They knew who I was. They weren't going to let me in. So I'm on the other side of the road, and I cry out to her.
And he comes walking out of nowhere like God Himself, like the Messiah of all times. And he's got on his suit, and he's dashing. He looks great.
This is back in 1994. Norma McCorvey, as a result of what you have done, over 27 million little baby boys and girls have been slaughtered in this nation.
And he tells me this, and it crushes me.
She told me later, she said, I felt like I couldn't breathe. She couldn't, and she was gasping for air, and she left. She went out the back door, and she said, I've got to go. She didn't sign one book. So now, fast forward to 1995, we're moving Operation Rescue right next to A Choice for Women. That's the abortion mill that she was. There's a wall about that big, and we were right next to them. And so all of the media, the first thing she did was not call the police. She called the media. So we had a three-ring circus out there. We had satellite trucks all over the place. Time magazine puts this article, and it says, Roe meets rescue. There's going to be violence.
Operation Rescue with Flip Venom and company moved into the available space next door to the A Choice for Women abortion facility where Norma was working. And within almost days, it seemed, the folks with Operation Rescue were befriending Norma.
It didn't make any difference how much I stayed out in front of the mill, how much I cussed them, how much I screamed at them, how many heart attacks I had. They would just look at me and smile.
And then one day, I got in. It was early on a Saturday morning. Nobody was at the abortion mill. But she was there, and her truck was there, and she was there, and I was there. And I walked out of the car, and I was going into our office, and she came out of the door, and I looked at her, and I said, Miss Norma, what are we going to do? And And we sat down at a little bench right out in front of that place with a choice for women right above. That was the office. And I said, Miss Norma, I want to apologize to you for what I said. I saw that those words hurt you deeply. And she said, and her ears, or her eyes began to, puddle up with tears. She said, I just couldn't breathe. I just had to leave. I did not know that she left and went out the back. I thought she just went on and did what she did. And I said, Miss Norma, I'm sorry those words hurt you so much. I didn't mean to do that. I care about you and love you enough to tell you the truth. This just started, and all of a sudden I became real to her.
That won my heart. I knew that he had a gentle side to him. I just didn't know how deep it went. That got me.
One of the volunteers was Rhonda Mackey. She had 2 little daughters, adorable, Emily and Chelsea, 7 and 5. And they would always greet Miss Norma. Hi, Miss Norma, how are you? And they'd play on the little sidewalk because they were right next to each other.
There were 2 little girls, Emily and Chelsea. Emily was 7, Chelsea was 3. And they just loved her. And they said, Miss Norma, would you please take us to church? And she'd look at them and she'd say, how could I say no to these little beautiful children?
I told her, can you go to church with us on the day when I kept on asking her every day on like Wednesdays or Saturdays. Every day I was there, I asked her to go to church.
And I met 2 very enchanting children by the name of Emily and Chelsea Mackey. And they showed me that there was another way to live. And that way was to believe in God.
And so it was a Wednesday night, and Norma went with the Mackey family to the Hillcrest Church in Dallas, responded to the altar call, gave her heart to Jesus, and left. I mean, within, again, days, left the abortion industry because she had come to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ.
Thank you for loving and setting me free. Thank you for giving your life just for me. How I thank you. Jesus, I thank you.
There was this sweet spirit about her that you just knew something had happened in her world recently. You knew she'd come to Christ. Of course, the pro-life movement was abuzz. We were so excited about it. And there were so many suggestions about how she should be baptized. I mean, the pro-life movement was discussing it. And finally, someone decided that she would be baptized in a pool.
We were all buzzing about Norma's recent conversion. Here, she had been the icon of the pro-choice movement. She had once defended abortion. Now, the Lord had converted her heart and her mind, and it was a remarkable story.
We actually found Christian media. They wanted media, but we found Christian media, someone with a great sensitivity to the things of the Lord, to be there to memorialize the event.
August 8th, 1995, Flip Benham on television baptized Norma, the Jane Roe of Roe v. Wade, who had left all of that behind with pro-life conversion, was baptized in a swimming pool.
Norma Leah McCorvey, I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Hallelujah! The old is gone, the old is buried, and the new has come, alive in Christ. My brothers and sisters, Miss Norma Leah McCorvey, born again.
The joy on their faces. The pictures to this day just bring us so much joy.
It was such an incredible moment when she came up out of that water. You just knew something great and wonderful had happened. And I was just honored to be there.
I had the privilege of baptizing her, and when we came out of that water, believe me, when it happened, it was as if 30 years were taken off her life. And the beautiful smile on her face, and of course the incredulous smile on my own, even though nothing in her circumstances were changed, nothing in her situation, everything was different. Everything became different because Jesus entered into her heart.
These two things right here are rattles. They're made out of gourds. I used to use them in my goddess worshiping thing. I guess it would be a thing. Then from there I went into the goddess and the crystals and the New Age stuff. And then I became a Christian right in the middle of the New Age stuff. You know, and that's totally unheard of. I mean, that's not cool.
She had a little medallion. It was a talisman around her neck. It was silver. We had that thing melted down. She gave me her book of ruins, and then ruins are just rocks that you cast, you know, the spiritual witchcraft stuff. And that's what she was depending on for her hope to find out what's going to happen in the future. And so I gave her a Bible, and she gave me that necklace, and I said, we'll have it melted down and we'll make it something beautiful. And we did. We melted it down, made a cross. It was a cross that she wore when she was on Ted Koppel. But melted it down, made that cross for her, and it says on the back of it is Deuteronomy chapter 30. Verses 19 through 20.
When I joined Operation Rescue 2 years ago in 1995, I had told Pastor Flip that I wanted a cross.
Yeah.
And I'd kind of looked around and couldn't really find anything that I was pleased with. So Pastor Flip had spoken to this jeweler friend of his in Dallas, and so I gave him the pro-abortion bracelet. And by the way, I'd like for you to bless it if you wouldn't mind.
I'd be glad to.
And then this jeweler had it made. I mean, he made it for, you know, for me, and he put Deuteronomy 30 verse 19 on it.
Choose life.
Yes.
I call heaven and earth as witnesses against you this day that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Now choose life so that you and your children may live, and that you may learn to love the Lord your God and to fear him always, for the Lord is your life.
I like myself. I love him. And I try to do and live as close to a Christian life as I can. I acknowledge God now where I never did before. And I have like an inner peace.
The simple truth, the simple fact of history, is that God used Operation Rescue, its leaders, and its foot soldiers to bring Norma to the Lord Jesus Christ. Wisdom is vindicated by her children. It was then that Norma and I became friends.
I really wanted Norma to go face to face with Randall Terry on that stage, a national venue. All the national media were there. And I will remember this for the rest of my life, as I think anyone who was present there will remember it.
Norma, there is someone who was way on the other side of the line for you during those years who would like to say and do something special for you.
I speak for all of us when we say, we forgive you in Jesus' name. Yes.
That hug and those kisses sent a message that, first of all, no one is beyond forgiveness, redemption, and welcome.
Norma's conversion to Christ and her repudiation of her stance on abortion, and the fact that she was now committed to overturning Roe versus Wade and making it a crime to kill unborn babies, all of that sent shockwaves through the pro-abortion community. They tried to play it off, but they were rattled.
Many people will wonder what impact this will have on the pro-choice movement, I don't think it should have any impact at all.
So Roe versus Wade has been here for 22 and a half years now. It's been 25 years since I first met Jane Roe. What I'm glad about is the case is there. It has meant choice for thousands of people, and whatever she says, whatever she does, it doesn't affect it.
All the players that are involved, you know, they're just mean-spirited, you know. They just, all they care about is getting that almighty dollar.
Yeah.
And that's all they care about. They don't care about the women.
Norma did not only work with the rescue movement, she worked with every pro-life person she could in the entire country.
I'm down here in California, in San Diego, with Operation Rescue National. That's where I'm a missionary, and I'm a servant of Christ now.
Norma and I traveled several times to Washington, D.C. to help launch several events. We traveled quite extensively and again tried to bring forward the not only the pro-life message, but to change and affect legislation along the way, and to bring a message of hope and inspiration based on her own story, however complex it may be.
I first met Norma at the Rose Dinner at the March for Life in the year 2000. And I just came up in a big crowd, a lot of people were around her. But I said, Miss Norma, I think you're gonna be involved in overturning Roe v. Wade someday. And she said, that's what I live for. Over the years, Norma's efforts to overturn Roe versus Wade and to save as many babies as she could took on many forms. She testified before Congress. She was arrested for peaceful protest at Notre Dame when President Obama spoke there. She was arrested protesting against the Sotomayor hearings for her appointment to the Supreme Court. She endorsed my campaign for the U.S. House of Representatives in '98 as well as 2012. And she was a part of the effort to overturn Roe versus Wade. Sandra Cano, who was Doe of Dovey Bolton, called me and poured out a story of fraud and deception. And I was going to meet her the next week in Atlanta where she lived, but I told her I'm going to meet Norma McCorvey again in depth on Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2000. Because after Sandra told me this story on February 11th, and I'd been praying, Lord, do you really want us to do this? And I told Sandra, and she said, Mr. Parker, Doe's been a doom on my shoulders ever since it came down.
As a former Supreme Court plaintiff, I am entitled to the right to change my mind and to go back to the courts, even if I have to go to the Supreme Court, and ask them to reconsider Roe versus Wade.
Norma and Sandra Cano, who was Doe of Dovey Bolton, those two women could file their own motions to set aside the judgment that brought legalized abortion to America. We presented over 5,000 pages of evidence, and the Supreme Court did not rule against Norma. They denied cert, which simply means we don't want to hear your case, and we're not going to. So it is not a ruling against her, but it says we're hardening our hearts. We used you once to make the law we wanted to make, and here you are again with massive evidence. We don't care.
As much as I'd like to see Roe versus Wade overturned, I don't know if it'll happen in our lifetime or even in my grandchildren's lifetime, but it will happen.
At Notre Dame, she had choice words for Obama. I'm sitting next to her as she's doing the Fox News interview, and she tells the reporter to her face what she thinks, and then goes on to describe why she should be given the honorary doctorate. And she should have. Imagine that if Norma McCorvey had spoken at the commencement address at Notre Dame, history would be different.
Well, I came here to show my support for life and to get arrested along with all the other saints.
For whatever reason, God put you at the beginning. Are you hoping to be at the end of the scourge of abortion?
Yes.
I'm just 61, so I have about 40 more years left.
Amen. You did not abort your baby, did you?
No, I never had an abortion. I never killed anything in my life, well, except ants.
Well, let's hope everyone will stop killing.
I do too.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Thank you.
Those of us who are pro-life leaders and pro-life activists know that our common fight to end the killing of babies brings us into contact with Christians from every denominational stream. We share a Trinitarian baptism and a desire to save babies from death and make it a crime once again to kill an unborn baby. Well, Norma, after her conversion to Christ, spent a lot of time with a lot of Christians, including Roman Catholic Christians. She was inquisitive. She was not afraid to ask questions, was not afraid to get into debates. And as time went on, she actually converted to the Catholic Church.
And, you know, come back and forth. I got to know Norma each year a little bit better. And then one year she said to me, you know, first of all, she nicknamed me Woman of the East. That was my nickname, the Woman of the East. And she would call me and say, okay, woman, if she had a question. Especially because at that time, she was from 1995, she became a Christian. Reverend Philip Benham, of course, baptized her. But then in 1998, Father Pavone brought her into the Catholic Church. So in those years, she had lots of questions. So she would call me and say, okay, Woman of the East. Tell me about the Catholic Church, and she'd name a question. You know, I said, well, Norma. I said, no, you could ask Father Frank. She goes, I know, he already told me the answer, but I want to check it with you.
In fact, she asked me, when she asked me, it was back in 97, 98, she said to me one day via email, she said, can you teach me how to say the rosary? And that's when I realized this woman is going to join the church.
Then Norma was feeling drawn to the Catholic Church. And so Father Frank was living over and working in Rome at the time, corresponding with Norma. Father Robinson was her spiritual daddy who took her under his fatherly wing. And so when she felt drawn to the Catholic Church, and they weren't going to Mass yet, but they would have their catechism. He was the one giving them the catechism, preparing her for her confirmation, and they would have lunch and soup, and it was very cute.
So one day she comes to me and she says, well, Father, I had a dream, and God told me, you will be with me soon. I am calling you home. Now again, this was like early 98. And she said, what's that mean? What is God trying to tell me? And I said to her, Norma, I don't know. Ask him. Just ask him. God will let you know what it means. So, I don't know, a month or so later, she gets back to me and says, Father, now I know what it means. He means I'm called to be a Catholic. Come home to me to the church that I founded. That's what he meant. So I said, okay, we'll help you.
So, August 17th, 1998, at St. Thomas Aquinas in Dallas, Texas, I was there with some of my young children, and Norma was received into the Catholic Church. Father Frank was homilist and confirmed her, and Father Robinson gave her her first Holy Communion, and it was just absolutely beautiful.
After Norma's conversion, she and I became friends, and over the years we became close friends. We spent a lot of time together, and she had a decent group around her, people who loved her and who she loved, people who saw sides of her that other people didn't get to see. And all of us can tell you that being in a friendship with Norma was like being on a roller coaster at points. And at times, the roller coaster would go off the tracks. But in the end, we stayed friends.
I first met Norma when Randall asked if I'd go to the airport to pick her up, and he said she might not be there. And I thought, might not be there? I don't understand. He said, just go, don't be late. So I went, and I thought, I don't even know what she looks like. How am I gonna figure this out? I just went, and I drove up to baggage, and there she was. I don't know how I knew who she was, but I knew it. I asked if she was Norma, Miss Norma, and she said, yes, get out of the car, come sit here by me, let me have a smoke.
I was pregnant with my 5th child, and I was going to go to my first March for Life in January of 2000. And Norma was going also, she was going to be speaking. And so we went as a team, we went together. And it was a really special time because I was with Norma, but my name wasn't on the VVIP list for everything. And yet she said, we're together. If I'm not going to sit in this section unless my friend, my sister, comes with me. And she said, this was Norma in her Normaness, and she was always joking and cutting up, but she said, we're pregnant. So it's like, and I was like, okay, I'm married and this is my 5th, but we're bonded and we're sisters, and it was so much fun.
I got to know her over the years pretty well, and I hardly ever had a conversation with her, even if it started out with her coming to me in distress and sadness and whatever, that we didn't end up having a laugh. She was never far from being able to break into laughter, seeing the humorous side of things. And I think that was a gift that the Lord gave her, because her life was so filled with pain, so filled with sorrow.
One time I was sleeping in her home in Dallas. She would have me stay there quite often. And she said, oh, don't mind my cat Maxine, Janet, but she likes to walk back and forth on the headboard while you're sleeping, so just ignore her. I said, okay, Norma, I think I can deal with that. And so one time when Women of the East came down to Texas, she said, okay, I've had it, girl. We're going to get a cowboy hat and boots. I'm going to make a Texan out of you. And so we had the funniest time going shopping, and she charged all kinds of hats on me, and and tried on different kinds of cowboy. I still have the hat and cowboy boots, by the way. If I had to pick a word to describe Norma, it would be feisty. She was very feisty. She had her own opinion about things, couldn't change her mind about too much.
One time, Norma showed up with 3 big bags full of clothes from the local department store and was like, look, baby girl, I got you covered. And so we go through and we try these things on. I was so flattered. She thought I was 2 sizes smaller than I am. But I squeezed into them. All kinds of glitz. And she told me I had beautiful eyes. We're driving down to downtown D.C. to do some protest or something. And she's telling me how beautiful my eyes are. I was so touched. That I did my eye makeup nicely. I grew up with 7 brothers, so to be told that I looked pretty in my makeup and that I had nice eyes meant the world to me. Later on, I'm pregnant, and she sends me maternity clothes. Not baggy maternity clothes. I mean, you got to cover the baby, but they were cool. Black sweatshirt, black and gray stripes, and black pants to go with it. I felt cool being pregnant in those clothes. And then Margaret's born, and she sends me cute clothes, bows for the hair, everything. I mean, you just to be loved is all you really want in life. And she did that for me as a friend. I can't be more thankful.
There's many times that she would call me and say, Hector, I feel led to pray for you. I just feel something in my spirit. Something is wrong with you. I need to pray with you. During times of my own hardship, there were times that she would render support and love and encouragement and would speak life to me at times when I had my own adversities in my life in raising my children and the ministry and so forth.
She always asked me about my daughters and how they were doing, and I'd ask her about her daughter Melissa and her grandkids. And we shared that we all had girls, and she said, isn't it great that we had girls, Janet? Girls are better, aren't they, than boys? They're much easier, And I said, well, I don't know about easier, but, so we shared that common thing, that we both raised girls,
I was in labor at the hospital, and Norma accompanied me with their prayers. They were outside of my room praying the rosary while I was in labor, about to deliver my son Mike, who he'd gone to the March for Life with us, right? 5 months pregnant. We were pregnant. She's adopted us. And they were praying the rosary, and Norma was one of the first ones to hold my baby after he was born.
This is what I really loved, everybody loved about Norma, was her humanity. We're talking about a real human being. Everybody wanted to put her up on a pedestal. Everybody wanted to make her a celebrity. And she enjoyed the limelight. Come on, any of us who knew her, anybody does. When you're on stage, when people are giving you applause and adulation, it's human nature. That was also part of her humanity. But she was raw. She was raw in her humanity, unpretentious. You didn't have to guess what she was thinking, because she would tell you in no uncertain terms. I mean, there was nothing oblique, nothing politically sensitive, nothing, deferential. It was like raw.
She invited me to her house when she was living in Dallas. And she said, Father, I hear that Catholics bless their houses with holy water. Could you do that for me? I said, yeah. I said, I don't presume you have any holy water around. No, I don't. So we took a big jug of water like this. I blessed the water. We blessed the house. And then I said, well, now, Norma, you keep this water. And, you know, you can dip your finger and you can bless yourself every day. Oh, that's wonderful. So she kept the holy water. About a month later, I'm talking to her on the phone. I said, so how's your supply of holy water? Father, don't get mad, but my friend and I, we forgot it was holy water, and we drank it.
She loved to be sensational. She loved to be shocking. She loved to be contrary. I think she liked to be contrary. She's, you know, I know she wasn't technically born in Texas, but she was a true Texan. You know, she was hard-headed, and she spoke her mind.
Norma was the typical Texas woman. You know, and people in other parts of the country may have this view of people. I tried to hire a lady one time to move here from Ohio to work at our office. And she wouldn't come because she said, I just didn't want to become one of those Texas women that are subservient to their men and, you know, the pregnant and barefoot and pregnant and do whatever their husbands tell them to do. I said, you have never met Texas women. If that's your view, I said, these Texas women are, you can push them so far, but not an inch further. And Texas men know where that line is. And if you were going to be around Norma, you better know where that line was too, because she'd be the most gracious, nicest, affable person you could meet. But if you cross that line, then things weren't quite as nice as they were the few seconds earlier. So
she was so much fun. And she would always say something crazy. But she would walk up to me and say the strangest things. And I remember this one time we were speaking together at an event in San Antonio, and she walked up and said, I don't have a bra on. Okay.
She had a little bit of mischievousness to her because she'd like to say things just to push a button once in a while. And she'd like to say something just, it's like sticking electrodes to a frog. Let's just do this and see how he jumps.
But I remember her coming up to me and saying, and I rarely get these kinds of compliments, she said, you're looking really dapper, something like that. You're really looking dapper. And she said, you better be glad I'm not hunting men, or I'd put my hands on you. Now, I'm a minister, okay? So a clergyman instantly blushes, and I remember feeling the capillaries in my face nearly exploding, and she got such a kick out of that. She just loved humiliating me.
Norma always tested people. We were with a very well-known national minister at a banquet having dinner at the table, and Norma decided to tell him that she drank beer and played pool the night before. And while she was telling this story, and of course embellishing this story about drinking beer and playing pool, and I can't tell you how many times she said she drank beer and played pool, his eyes got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and he obviously didn't know what to do with her. And you could not stop Norma. You couldn't say, Norma, talk to me.
And you know, she came across, to the average person that might talk to her, she might come across as not being very bright, not being very smart. And to reach that conclusion would be very, very incorrect, let's put it.
Norma called me every day for about a month, and I was busy studying. I was in law school. I didn't answer, and then she stopped calling, and I realized that I'd hurt her, and I felt terrible. I called her back every day for a month, and what can you do? A year later, she called me, forgave me, didn't even say forgive me, but we just picked up where we left off. And I knew then, you hang on to a friend. You hang on to, you make the time. So I made the time. Texted back and forth every day, emails, phone calls. She came and stayed with us.
Norma was the kind that said, this is who I am. If you like me, that's fine. If you don't, then going down the road. And I remember one time her saying to me about somebody that was mad at her. And she said, I made these people mad the other day. And she said, but you know what? They got a whole lifetime to get glad again. So that's the way it is.
She was loved and cared for. You know, I don't know how many people, I don't know anyone who has a network of friends that just take them in and take care of them. You might have one or two, but to have a whole network across the country. That was an unusual situation, but Norma was an unusual person. Norma McCorvey was a great lady.
The record of Norma being used and abused as a child is extensive and it's heartbreaking. That pattern of being used and abused went into her adult life as she became known as the Jane Roe of Roe versus Wade. The pro-abortion community used her. But even after her conversion, that pattern was something that she was constantly on guard against.
You know, Norma was used by a lot of people.
Sarah Weddington and Linda Coffey, the two attorneys back in 1969 that met with her on Greenville Avenue in a little pizza parlor, and they were looking for a little lady to be the name on a class action suit called Roe versus Wade. Sarah Weddington treated her like a piece of trash, but so did Patricia Ireland and what's her name, Kate Michelman, and all of those ladies, those Vassar yup-yups, they couldn't stand that little lady from the other side of the tracks who was attempted suicide, was a drug addict, was lesbian, and a lot of lesbian relationships, and just an embarrassment to them. They couldn't stand her. They could have cared less about her, and Norma made that very clear in I Am Roe and One by Love, her two books.
When this Roe versus Wade thing all started, and Sarah Weddington and Linda Coffey took advantage of her, they were looking for somebody just like her. And Norma told me that. She said, I figured out later on they wanted me just like I was. Easy to control, easy to manipulate. You know, they're professionals, they're educated, they had all the things I didn't have. And, you know, she told me, she said, I was living in Lee Park. So she was literally homeless when all this thing started. And they knew that. And they knew she could be taken advantage of.
She actually felt used and misled by her own attorneys in the original Roe v. Wade case. Nobody explained to her what abortion actually was. Of course, no counseling. Norma, of course, ended up not even getting an abortion. And really all she went to these people was, do you know a place I can get an abortion? But they were looking for a white woman, probably low income, that they could set up as a good test case.
She was taken advantage of. Sarah Reddington was cued into her because actually she did look to see if she could get an abortion. Of course, in Texas she couldn't. And then she decided, okay, that wasn't going to work. But then Sarah Weddington heard about her and met her for lunch. I mean, Norma was hungry, and she said, I signed that document over a pizza lunch. And then she never heard from Sarah Weddington really over the years it took. And Sarah Weddington knew darn well that she couldn't really help her. Even though Sarah Weddington herself had had an abortion herself and knew how she got an illegal abortion, so she knew if she really wanted to help her get an abortion, she could have done that, but she didn't. She just they were looking for someone to take advantage of, to work a case to legalize abortion, and Norma got duped into it, basically, over lunch because she was hungry. Oh, I had pizza.
All I was just a simple little old girl from Louisiana who thought she knew what she wanted. They wanted to change a law. I wanted to have an abortion. They said, Norma, don't you want to exercise your rights by having control over your own body? Yes, I said. Well, all you have to do is sign here on this dotted line. I signed it March the 7th, 1970. I wanted to have an abortion. I saved up my rent money. I went to an illegal abortion clinic here in Dallas, Texas. I saw the conditions of that clinic. I saw the dry blood on the floor. I saw all the roaches and all the other creepy things crawling around the floor. The only thing that stopped me was the fact that the clinic had been busted a week before that. That was the only thing that stopped me.
So you felt that you were manipulated by the lawyers?
Yes.
But you went to the lawyers, didn't you?
The lawyers came to me. I was told by the attorney who was going to be handling my adoption case for the baby I was wanting to abort that there were two women who were freshly out of law school, who wanted to overturn the Texas statute on abortion. We met. They misled me.
One time we all went together to a debate of Randall Terry and Sarah Weddington. And that was at SMU, and it was in 2002. So we were sitting with Norma, and kind of, you know, it was an interesting evening. It was definitely a lively debate. Sarah Weddington had just found out she had breast cancer. And that was definitely weighing on her mind as she debated. And at the end, questions were invited. And to my surprise, Norma stood up to ask a question. And I thought to myself, this is going to be really interesting. And it was. It was. Norma challenged Sarah on how she'd been used by her and the things that had happened between the two of them, and was really very unhappy, very upset, very distraught about it. And I was expecting from Sarah, here she's facing a life trial, you would think that she would have more insight into things that are more important. And I was expecting her to say to Norma, gosh, I'm sorry, or gosh, you know, I've thought about that, and I meant to talk to you about it, something that was reconciliatory, and not at all. Sarah just didn't give her even the scintilla of compassion, which was so shocking to me that Sarah, facing something as serious as breast cancer, would long for compassion, and yet she was denying something like that to Norma. She continued to treat her so disrespectfully and so uncompassionately. It really broke my heart for Norma. And clearly it upset Norma that evening, and it upset Norma in general.
When these people from Operation Rescue call me at home now, they don't say, hey, Norma, I wanted you to come down to the office, or hey, Norma, we're having a fundraiser. You know, you can get in and we're going to introduce you. We're going to acknowledge the fact that you're there, you know, but we don't want you to speak because you're a loose cannon, you know, and we don't want really loose cannons around, but we really do need you there because you're Jane Roe, and we don't have any other choice. So go figure.
You're saying that's the way you were used by the pro-choice movement?
Yes, sir.
She not only had a lot of guilt and so forth over the abortion issue herself, and the fact that she felt somewhat responsible for the deaths of all these children, but she felt like she had been hoodwinked. She felt like she had been taken advantage of. And she was, as a typical Texas woman, she doesn't like that. She's not going to like that idea that someone perceived her in such a way that they could take advantage of her, and that she fell for it.
But what if they tried to turn you into some kind of a symbol? What if they tried to use you now the way that some people feel you were used by the choice movement before?
We've already talked about that at great length, and there will not be any exploitation of my political status.
Who's we?
The right to life people.
She was used by the pro-choice movement, and I'm not sure I want this anywhere, but she was used on this side too.
Norma was a dire pro-lifer, but there were times she really felt used. And I think that just goes to show that if you don't have the personal element, you have nothing. It doesn't matter how pro-life you say you are if you don't have that element. And pro-lifers aren't perfect. So the people she was going to speak for weren't perfect. None of us are. She was not perfect. They aren't. But she felt it when that friendship wasn't there, even if the money wasn't there for a speaking fee, to acknowledge the fact that she was giving of her time and giving of her person. It's a horrendous feeling to have to describe what the abortion industry is, and then the conversion. And Norma gave of herself when she talked about her story.
As her daughter, Melissa, was to my left and her granddaughter was across, I said to all of them, I said, any wounds, any hurts, any ways that she may have felt exploited, I said, I want to, on behalf of everyone, but especially the pro-life movement, I want to ask for your forgiveness. We're sorry, and will you please forgive us?
As the years rolled on prior to Norma's conversion, and after she spent several years working in several abortion mills, the thought of babies being murdered right there in the building where she worked, in part because of her role in Roe versus Wade, began to disturb her deeply. After her conversion, her role in Roe versus Wade began to haunt her even more intensely at points. One can barely imagine the weight of guilt that she bore in her soul.
So after Norma had given her heart to Christ and all of her sins were forgiven and cast into the sea of forgetfulness, as far as the east is from the west, they were removed from her, which is forever, there was still torment inside of her.
It was smoke, 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 pot, 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 take pills, drop acid, do masculine, do anything you can get your hands on. That was pretty much how I wanted to stay all the time. Just stoned.
She knew who she was, and she wasn't always happy with who she was, and that was a problem. That was a sad thing to see.
The definition for abortion hit me in the face. I could see little babies being pulled out of their mamas, but they were alive. That's what I lived with for the better part of 14 years.
It's one thing to know God has forgiven you and receive his mercy, but it's harder to forgive yourself. And I think that was the thing that Norma always struggled with.
She had literally told me, I know God's forgiven me, but I just can't forgive myself. And I said, Norma, wait a minute. You need to think about what you're saying there. If you're telling me that God has forgiven you, but you can't forgive yourself, then what you're telling me is you have higher standards than he does, right? Because he can forgive you, but you can't. I said, you need to think about that, because you're putting yourself up on a pretty high pedestal there when you sit there and tell me that my standards are higher than God, so he can forgive me, but I can't. But last summer when I talked to her, she wasn't totally beyond that, but you could tell that she was kind of making some progress. She was becoming more and more at ease and more comfortable with her situation.
For years and years, I used to think that it was a woman's right to choose, period. But after working in 4 abortion clinics here in the Dallas area and learning a lot more, I started having inner conflicts with myself, Ted, and I really got extremely depressed when women would call into the clinics and want to make appointments for second trimester abortions. I'm proud to know that I don't have to go into another abortion clinic and watch women come out of abortion procedures crying and wanting to call their mothers. I don't have to look at dismembered bodies of children who've been ripped out of their mother's wombs. I don't have those nightmares anymore. I refuse to have those nightmares.
I don't have nightmares like I used to. Mm-hmm. I normally sleep a full night's sleep now, but I don't know. It's something that you'll never forget once you see it.
Yes.
It's like a big nightmare.
She knew she was forgiven by God and she'd repented, but every year, particularly around the anniversary of Roe v. Wade, and she'd feel another million deaths, and she'd feel responsible for that in a way.
2 times in her life when she noticed a children's playground empty, and it struck her. At first she didn't know why it was bothering her so much, but then she always lived with this, there was this tinge of guilt, you know, of even after she accepted the new life in Christ so radically that the very first time I did an interview with her, I said, so, you're the Jane Roe of Roe v. Wade. And she said, no, Father, I used to be the Jane Roe, but she's been laid to rest. I am a new creation in Christ. So she had a great awareness of that new life in Christ that we all share. But at the same time, I mean, we're human. The wound persists in some fashion. And so seeing an empty playground, I mean, who would look at an empty playground and get the thought across their mind, oh, it's my fault?
She said, you know, Pastor Flip, every time I go by an empty playground, I just see that the children aren't there, and I'm reminded of what I did, and I can't even look to God anymore without shame.
I just started praying to God to ask him to forgive me for helping Weddington and Coffee with the abortion, with the Roe versus Wade stuff. And I wrote empty playgrounds. I sat across from the playground that I had visited that eve with a small child, and that small child was Emily.
I sit across from a playground. I visited today with a small child. I know of such places where children play. But sadly there's none of them here today. Empty playgrounds all around, playful children not to be found.
She also told me a story once that she heard the sound of children's feet running through the abortion clinic where she worked before she gave her life to Christ. And of course she said, what is that? What is that? And she looked and there was nothing.
The freezer, where the parts were body parts were kept, and she had this eerie feeling. She never wanted to go back there where the freezer was, and she felt like if she had to go back there, she had to go back there to replace a light bulb or whatever. She felt like that the freezer was going to open, and like the babies were going to pull her in there, and the door would be slammed shut, and she'd be in the cold freezer. I mean, these are the things that the human mind does to you when you're involved in baby killing.
She heard lots of things. Believe me, there were lots of demons that we were dealing with, all sorts of things that go into a place where they're murdering babies. You know that they're there. And she saw things that shouldn't be seen. She experienced things that are just beyond anything that we can explain in the physical, but they're very real.
We don't know the horrors that people go through when they get involved in this abortion industry. It's terrible.
But in the years when you worked in the abortion clinics, you thought it was okay, didn't you? What were the reasons for you thinking then that it was okay? How did you justify it to yourself then?
I justified it, Tim, mostly every night with several pitchers of margaritas, if you really must know, because I needed a job.
Simply that?
That's it. I worked in abortion clinics from 1991 to 1994. I saw so many women 2, 3, and 4 times until it wasn't even funny. A lot of women use abortion as a means of birth control. A lot of women use abortion for whatever reason they want to, and abortion should be stopped. Abortion stops a beating heart.
In Norma's early life, she was a heavy drug user, a heavy drinker. She smoked her entire life. And these behaviors took a toll on her body. But make no mistake, as she drew near to death, she drew near to God.
She had COPD, and it was progressing and getting worse. And one of the things that we found with Norma was that she went to the hospital fairly frequently because she was afraid. She was afraid she wouldn't be able to breathe, and so she would call 911 for the emergency vehicles to come and get her and take her. She felt like the Lord was saying, it's time to come back home. This very last time, hospitalization, the morning of February 13th, I received a group text from Melissa that Norma had gone into ICU, that it was very, very serious, and they were not sure if she was going to pull through or not this time. and this would be the time to come. The doctors, we're not sure if this could be it. Got to spend very precious moments with Norma, her last days, holy ground. One of the things I was very blessed to be able to do as well was to bring, Norma's Catholic, I'm Catholic, to bring the prayers of the church to her bedside during these hours. Chaplets of Divine Mercy, what I call mercy songs, The Lord's My Shepherd, Lord I Need You, Hosea, those kind of songs. And the Rosary, of course. She said, I don't want to die. But then she said, but I want to leave here. I want to go. And so to be at bedside with her and to be able to encourage her to say, Norma, the Lord loves you so much, and you are in the palm of God's hand.
To see her, when we would pray for her, the rosary or the chaplet, she would be trying to bless herself. I mean, she was weak, but she would be trying to bless herself, and she would pray just a little of the prayers with us. She wasn't able to pray well, but her heart was there and she was praying.
We could tell she was looking and seeing something or someone we could not see. But she reached up with her arms, and her hands were just like this, as if she was putting her hands around the neck of someone who was reaching and embracing her. She went from, where are the babies? She's concerned about the babies. Where are the babies? To look at all the babies. Norma said this. And then she had progressed from, I don't want to die, to, I'm ready. I'm ready. I want to go home. She would say, I want to go home. And I would say, you will be going home. And we talked about, that she would see Father Robinson and they would be together. And again, as I'm sitting next to her, she's clear as day. She's looking straight ahead, and she said, look at these two babies right here in front of us. Of course, I didn't see them, but she just reached and embraced. And I'm like, Lord, you are so amazing. Found out from a friend who's there with the family, the songs that I had sent, these prayer songs, they had put the phone on Norma's heart so that the songs were playing, the prayers were being prayed on her heart, and she died of heart failure. So as she took her last breath, she was accompanied by those mercy songs and prayers.
After Norma McCorvey left this life, the Washington Post ran a story, and the final quote of the story was a quote from over 20 years ago, when Norma said that she regretted the fact that she was never able to obtain an abortion. This was deliberate deceit, casting an aspersion on Norma's character, on her conversion, and on her convictions. Norma left this life as a devout Christian, as an ardent pro-lifer, and we need to remember her in that light.
God really has a lesson for the nation in her life, because she, for a time, as the poster girl of the pro-choice movement, she jumped off the poster. But the reason she jumped off the poster is that she never really fit in it on it in the first place. I remember the story she told, it's in the beautiful book Won by Love, about her conversion. When Gloria Allred was arranging for her to announce publicly that she was the Roe of Roe v. Wade, I think it was like the day before the big press conference, she turns to Gloria and says, oh, by the way, I think abortion is wrong.
When she accepted Jesus Christ as her Lord and Savior, and she was baptized, and she was baptized by Reverend Flip Benham in a swimming pool, I mean, literally, submersion. When she came up out of that water, I think she wants people to realize that I am Roe no more. Matter of fact, that's what she named her ministry when she developed her own ministry and went around speaking, Roe no more, because Jane Roe died to Christ. and lives no more. And I think that's the most important thing for people to realize.
If Norma was still alive, she would want everyone to know that she did everything in her life that was possible to reverse Roe v. Wade. She went on TV, she went on radio, she traveled around the world, she spoke, and she did legal actions, including going to the Supreme Court itself saying, "This is wrong, stop it, reverse my case." She'd want to be remembered as the woman who tried to stop abortion, not as the woman whose case was used by the legal establishment to bring abortion to America.
One thing that is irrefutable is the fact that she did give her life to the Lord, and that she became a champion for the pro-life movement. And many have come to the Lord because of her. Many children, only in heaven will we know how many children were saved because of her incredible testimony. Whether she is a perfect human being or not is irrelevant, for the word declares that we all fall short of the glory of God. Whether she was passionate at one end or passionate for the other, ultimately she chose life. If anyone reflects upon her life, that they're not blinded by any of the negative events that may have occurred in her life, but rather to reflect on the positive events of her life.
God used her so powerfully in the last 22 years of her life. I was so thankful. So the first 47 years, she was on the wrong side of history. She was on the wrong side of eternity. She gives her heart to Christ, and now she's on the right side of history. And thank God right now, she's really on the right side of eternity.
Having the opportunity to spend these last days and moments with Norma, and to see again God's incredible mercy, but to let this be the last week of her life and her last days where there could be reconciliation, love, and peace. The number one thing, and people have asked in media following her death, well, was she so conflicted and about her role, and was she at peace, or how could she reconcile? Melissa asked me to represent. I could do interviews, and I was making it very, very clear. Norma was at peace. She knew God's love. She knew His mercy. She knew His grace. She knew forgiveness. She was won by love. She was won by love. And no, she did not have a perfect life. Norma had a Norma-ness, but she was at peace. She was at peace.
May her memory be an inspiration to all of us until we see that day when Roe v. Wade is overturned and the full protection of law is restored to every unborn baby in America, just like Norma wanted.
Ladies and gentlemen, Norma McCorvey.